So good to be here with all of you, and an honor to be with John on this stage in Silicon Valley. Whoever thought two kids from Long Island would be sitting here today with you talking about Silicon Valley and Stanford University. One of the things John and I were talking about backstage was just how far Silicon Valley has come, and also how far our country has come on the research agenda and the way innovation happens. From places like Bell Labs to Xerox PARC to Silicon Valley, we've seen that innovation's changed a lot, and now Silicon Valley is the hub. And one of the big questions we wanted to hear from John about is, how do we stay the hub of innovation, and what does the future of that innovation look like?
Well, that's a great question, Susan. We both came out when this was not the center of the technology world. It certainly had the semiconductor industry here, but if you wanted to go talk to the leaders in the computer industry, you got on a plane. You flew to Boston, you flew to New York to talk to the leadership. And now, everybody in the world comes to Silicon Valley because it is really the hub. So what's built that hub? I think, first of all, talent is the most important thing in the Valley. Getting great talent, importing great people. It's why there's been such a strong movement towards high-skill visa reform, for example. It's been so supported among companies, among the universities here in the Valley. It's keeping that innovation going. I think the universities now play the sort of fundamental research role that Bell Labs or Xerox PARC or IBM Research used to play in an earlier time. So keeping that energy. There's also incredible optimism that's out here. People are willing to take risks. They're willing to think differently about problems. And we have to preserve that feeling. It's a very different sense of opportunity than you see elsewhere in the world. And we've got to make sure we keep it.
So how do we do that? Talk to me a little bit about talent and share with us your thoughts on some of the challenges we're facing, immigration, H-1 visas. How do we keep attracting the talent and build the infrastructure we need to actually continue?
So I think there are really two parallel things we have to do. We have to continue to be attractive to the best talent in the United States and the best talent in the world. And we've got to work on, the Valley is a place where you can come from anywhere in the world and find people who like the same kind of performance, like the same kind of food, and feel in. And while we're not a perfect meritocracy, we're not, no place is. We're a lot better than other places in the world, I think, when it comes to that. So there's an opportunity for bright young people with great ideas to rise and really make important accomplishments. We have to keep that, keep attracting those people. We've got to get visa reform done. We have to get general immigration reform done as well. I mean, if you think about these young people, the dreamers now that are going to college, getting college degrees, who came into the country as you know, this high, and they're now stuck in a dilemma about the future of their ability to contribute to our country. So we've got to fix that problem, but I think the high skills piece of it is so critical to the Valley's future. And then we got to worry about infrastructure and housing. We have to figure out how we're going to make it possible for people to live in this area, to afford a house, and not to have to drive an hour and a half each way to get to work. We're going to have to build out mass transit. We're going to have to figure out what we're going to do with housing. We're going from a suburban environment to a semi-urban environment. And as the density goes up, we're going to have to figure out how to make living and working in the Valley as great as it's always been.
You know, you mentioned the word meritocracy, which I always am interested in. And one of the things I'd love to hear you talk about a little is, both at Stanford and in the Valley, what are we really doing to make sure that we have diverse people leading, that we're embracing the diversity of our communities, and really both on every front, gender, ethnicity, income, et cetera?
Yeah, I think we still have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and I think they're across the whole spectrum. And they begin quite early in life, encouraging young people to think about being in a STEM discipline, majoring in a STEM discipline. We don't yet do a very good job either with women. They're still dramatically underrepresented in engineering and the physical sciences. Doing well in some of the other fields, and there's some hopeful signs. I mean, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of women, for example, interested in environmental engineering or product design. And we're even finally seeing some rise in the computer science majors after a long challenge in that area. So there's some hope there. We're not necessarily doing a good job with some of the traditional minority groups in terms of getting them majored. We've got a very diverse undergraduate body, but it's not uniformly distributed across majors and different kinds of opportunities. There's a lot of unconscious bias that still exists in our system, and you can see data that's collected that shows that people still have unconscious bias, and so we have to be better about educating people. We've got to be better about role models. We've got to support young people. And one of the challenges we often see is a young woman who's interested in a discipline where there are not many women today finds herself in an isolated situation. She goes into a classroom. There are 3 women and there are 50 guys, and it does feel a little isolated. So how do we support them? How do we help them to be successful? I think all those things are things we're going to have to work on. You know, this is an area that I think really thrives on the diversity of the community, and we're going to have to reinforce it and build it and continue to push people into leadership positions.
So how do you think about that at Stanford itself in terms of really accelerating that transition? You know, I've looked at studies that you yourselves have done on women in leadership at Stanford and the percentage of resources women actually control and people they lead. How are you thinking about that as an institution?
Yeah. So I think we approach this both analytically as well as try to create opportunities. So from an analytical viewpoint, we want to make sure that unconscious bias is not affecting either our procedures if we're looking for new faculty and doing promotions or in how we resource people who work in the laboratories. But I think it's also about creating opportunities. I remember it was only about the late 90s that Stanford appointed the first woman dean in the university. Today, more than half the deans are women. And I think we've been able to create, and more than half the deans, including the Dean of Engineering for the first time as a woman. Yes. That was a big step forward for us. Yeah, that was great. And she's a physicist on top of that. So, but I think that sent a message. She got that job for one simple reason. She was the best qualified person for the job. And the opportunity, though, it creates to kind of say, you know what, to young people, girls can do this, you can major in this, you can be part of this, and you can be part of the leadership team in such an institution as well. And I think we have to continue to reinforce that message, think about how to do it on corporate boards, think about how to do it in other leadership positions.
So higher education is such an incredible lever for change in this country, and we're so proud of our higher education system, yet today it's under huge pressure, cost pressure, tuition increases, innovation from online education, MOOCs, et cetera. How are you thinking about the challenges Stanford faces and higher ed more broadly, and what are you doing to make sure we're staying at the forefront and keeping the value of that higher education for our people?
Yeah. So we face a whole range of different problems in the higher education sector. I think the pressures right now, particularly on our public institutions, are acute. I think the situation, the University of California system is the premier public higher education system in the country. But it's in danger, and it's in danger because of a long history of budget cutting and underinvestment by the state. We're going to have to figure out how to make that work better, and we're going to have to get out of this situation where we cut their budget, but then we still micromanage them as if they were receiving most of the money from the state. They don't get most of the money from the state anymore. They get most of the money from the students who are paying tuition. So we're going to have to figure out how to make that work. We've got to get our entire system to work. We've got to get our community colleges to work better because they so often are the opportunity for somebody who's coming from a family that doesn't have college education in their background, and that's the entry point. So we've got to make that work better. Obviously, we have to fix K12. That's a big, long-term problem for our country. But in the meantime, we've got to make sure that higher education is doing the best job it can, supporting people, and continuing to be that ladder of opportunity for people to move up in their life and have greater opportunities.
And how do you think about higher ed's responsibility towards K12? So everybody acknowledges we have huge challenges there, and obviously higher ed connects and has a lot of influence on that, including training teachers. How do you think about higher ed's role in reforming K12 education?
Yeah. So I think you touched on one part of it, which is teacher training. We absolutely have a role on teacher training. We as a country need to step up and make a better commitment to teacher training. One of the challenges you see is that unlike some parts of the world where the teachers come from the top part of the college spectrum. In many cases, that's not where our teacher corps comes from. So we struggle. But it's more than that. We're also at fault. We underinvest in teacher training. Many institutions spend less to train a teacher than they do to train somebody who's a philosophy major or history major or English major or engineering major. We should address that problem and try to do a better job of it. But we have another capability to bring to bear, which is the ability to do research and the ability to look at our schools and understand what's working and what's not working. And I think the brightest spot on the horizon, the brightest hope really, is really quantitatively taking data, analyzing what works, and doing reforms not based on anecdotes and people's guesses about what works, but on real data and moving it forward that way. That'll take time, because you've got to do the measurements, you've got to do the experiments, you've got to try things out. But at least we know when we make a change, we're moving in the right direction.
Right. And speaking of data, we know that college enrollments have increased dramatically in this country over the past few decades, although college completion is actually stuck.
It's stuck.
It's stuck. And although...
It's particularly stuck for lower income and minority communities. That's really where the big stick is. Right now, I just saw new data. If you come from the upper income quartile, the odds that you'll get a college degree are 77% of the kids in the upper income quartile. In the lower income quartile, it's 16%.
Right. And that gap is continuing to increase on multiple fronts.
Increasing.
How do we make sure that institutions like Stanford don't become bastions of the wealthy, generation after generation getting the advantage of a place like Stanford, whereas other people feel like they can't get in?
Yeah. Well, for us, it's about having a commitment to financial aid, having a needs-blind admissions process. Today, if you apply to Stanford and your family makes less than $60,000 a year, you don't pay any tuition and you don't pay any room and board. We ask every student to commit about $3,000 a year in self-help. So summer employment during the year, because we believe it's important to have students feel like their education, they're contributing to it. If you make less than $100,000 a year, there is no charge for tuition. So we've been able to do that, obviously, because we've had many donors to the institution that have built the endowment over time. In the class, about half of our students are on financial aid. This year, the average financial aid package is $39,000. So it's much more than half the cost of attendance. We've got to spread that around. We've got to ensure that kind of accessibility. We should be increasing Pell Grants. At the same time, we should hold universities responsible for students completing.
And as you look at issues of inequity on campus and frankly off, when you look at the Valley and the vast disparities between different populations, what do we need to be doing as a community? This is a Silicon Valley convening to actually address those issues, and what is Stanford's role in that? Yeah,
a lot of it begins in our K12 system. I'm a fan. I think we should have preschool for everyone. I think we should have it for everyone in California. It should be a right, just as, you know, one thing I think as a country that believes in opportunity and believes in democracy, we owe every single child in this country a decent education and a decent start in life. And I don't care what their parents do, we owe it to them as a country, and we should be delivering it. So that begins with preschool, especially for kids that don't have that opportunity today. And because many of the families in the Valley do have the capability to provide that, but many don't. So it begins there. It begins with improving our K12 system and funding our schools better. We do a crazy thing. If you go and look at where the kids from the poorest communities go to school, you'll find those are the under-resourced schools. In some sense, those kids need more money than the kids from a higher-resourced, wealthier community. And making that more even across the state is critical. That's a critical reform. Then we've got to get great teachers. And we should be paying that teacher who's working in a challenging district, facing problems. We should be paying them more than we pay a teacher who's working in a wealthy district. Wealthy district's great. Well, you have to deal with the parents, of course. But other than that, it's a great place to be. There are lots of resources. There are lots of opportunities. How do we support the teachers who are willing to work in these really challenging, disadvantaged communities that are really working hard? And how do we get these young people inspired about thinking about college, going to college, having that kind of opportunity for themselves, and convincing them that they can do it and they can find the opportunity? And I think if we can do that and support them better, we'll build a system that continues to provide opportunity for young people.
When you consider where Stanford has come from and where it is today, and the 15 years you've been there, I know a lot of people who heard I was going to be up here with you today said, I'd love to hear John's reflections on what surprised you the most, what's been your biggest learning, how you're thinking about Stanford in the future. Share with us some of your thoughts and reflections on that journey.
Yeah, so for me, it's been a really interesting experience because when I came as a young faculty member, I was so focused on my own research. And in fact, when I started and we did the work related to risk computer architecture, I published my papers, and I thought everybody in industry is just going to pick up these ideas and run with them because they're so obviously great ideas. Talk about a naive academic, huh? And it was only because Gordon Bell, the founder of Digital Equipment Corporation, convinced me that you had to get out and start a company. So I had that great learning experience of being an entrepreneur, and I think I brought some of that back to the university and said, I didn't know the first thing. I didn't know what I was doing when I started that company. Let's make sure that we're teaching our students what they need to know if they want to pursue an entrepreneurial route. So that's been really remarkable to see. I think the other thing that's remarkable is the incredible students we get. They are just incredible. And they come from all walks of life, all kinds of experiences. We had many years ago, when I was in my first year, we had our first student who was a Maasai tribesman come to the university. Mm-hmm. This was a young man who had nothing, zero. We paid for everything. And just to show how the world has become such a smaller place, he was on campus and happened to be in New York City on 9/11 when the tragedy occurred at the World Trade Center. So he was on his way back to Kenya. It took him a while to get back to Kenya. When he got back to Kenya, his local village said, well, you know, the United States is educating this young man from our village, and they've just had this horrible thing happen. We should help them. So they took up a collection of 16 cows to donate to the people of New York City to help them through this tragedy. And in the Maasai culture, cows are the high point, the wealthiest thing they have. So they collected these cows. The donation was on the front page of the New York Times and everything. So it's about 2 years later, and the young man is graduating, and some of our donors brought his mother and the head elder in his tribe back. And he said to me, well, the head elder wants to meet with you and thank you. So I meet with the head elder, and he talks the local dialect, which our student's translating for me. And he says, he wants you to know that the cows are all there. They're still American cows, and so are all the babies. I said, great. Please take good care of them for us and use the milk and other things, and we appreciate it. But it just shows you how the ability of a university to transform the world and the opportunity for our other students to have this young man in their class, how transformative was that for them. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think that the diversity that speaks to is critical, and the interesting questions of access. One of the things that is notable is as our population has expanded and the demand for a Stanford education has increased and admission rates have gone to 5%. Have you thought about expanding Stanford? Whether it's literally having more students on campus or taking advantage of the rise of digital education, MOOCs, how are you thinking about having more people have access to a Stanford education?
So we are contemplating a modest expansion on campus that would occur slowly over time. I mean, we have our model is kind of a residential high-touch model. It is a model which I think has the highest impact on young people and provides the best kind of education. But it is a more expensive model, obviously, when you have to bring all those people to campus and have them live there. So we will be building additional dorms to create that kind of opportunity. I think the MOOCs provide another way to extend the outreach of the university. One of the fascinating things that's occurred is you look out there and who's consuming those MOOCs. There are two communities. There's the professional community that's consuming largely courses that are related to their continuing education and the enhancements of their professional skills. And then there's this whole community around the world. This may be the only way they can get education beyond what's locally available in maybe their high school. In sub-Saharan Africa, less than 5% of the young people get to take even one college course. So getting that material out there, helping instructors and helping students, I think, is a great public mission that the university can play in trying to provide that kind of education.
Have you thought about other types of innovations to your own model? For example, with the real interest in lifelong learning and the notion that historically people go to college for 4 years if they're fortunate enough to do that, they graduate, they work, and whatever learning happens, happens after that. Have you thought about something like saying, okay, you're admitted at 18 or 20, and you have 8 years of college education to use throughout your lifetime, for example?
Right. So I think we've already seen the sort of continuing education model become standard practice, particularly in the professional disciplines, in the business school, in engineering, in medicine, in law. I think we're seeing more and more people come back, and they're coming back online because everybody's too busy to come to the main campus. They may come for a weekend, a wrap-up a kind of experience, but by and large, they're going to be online, and their interaction's going to be online, even in group learning settings. I think we now have technology that allows students to collaborate in a MOOC online. I think the undergraduate question is a good one. I mean, will we say to students, you know, come take your courses, but you don't have to do it all in 4 consecutive years. And it'll be interesting to see how the students respond to that kind of opportunity, because there's also a dynamic where they form their own community, they become part of that community, and those bonds are incredibly strong. They're going to want to keep those bonds. So how they are going to interpret that kind of opportunity, I think, remains to be seen.
As you reflect on all the innovation that's going on out in the world and some of the innovation that's going on at Stanford, how are you thinking about the biggest priorities for what you need to be doing with however long? I know the introduction mentioned another 15 years. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but for whatever the next set of years you decide to invest as president of Stanford University.
So one of the things I think we've been, for the last 15 years, been working on is the importance of interdisciplinary research, particularly focused on the biggest problems that we face as a human society around the world, where issues around the environment and climate change and water resources. These are not issues that are going to be solved by even the greatest faculty member working solo. They're issues that are going to be attacked by teams of great experts in different fields working together to find solutions. So we built that kind of activity there. We've built it in BioX, our interdisciplinary center that brings together people from engineering, biomedical sciences, chemistry, physics, to try to look at new approaches to solving human health problems. We have a new one we've just launched on neuroscience that we're really excited about. We know so little about the human brain and how it works. And if we're going to find cures for diseases ranging from early childhood diseases like autism to diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, which the longer we live, the more of us are going to get those diseases. We've got to first have a much deeper understanding. This is something we've learned from the work that's gone on in cancer. The real progress in cancer came when we began to understand the genetic underpinnings of what was happening in cancer. The same thing will be true in trying to cure neurodegenerative diseases. We're going to have to understand the brain and how it can reprogram itself and how we can help that process. So I'm really excited about that. It was mentioned in the introduction. I'm really excited about what we've been able to do in the arts. If you haven't been to the Bing Concert Hall, This is one of the greatest concert halls, small concert halls in the country. You should go sometime. And with the new Anderson collection that we got from the Andersons, a truly great collection of modern American art. Those are things we've been able to do working with our supporters and the community, I think, that provide an opportunity for our students as well as the local community.
You mentioned research, and obviously one of the huge functions of universities is research, as well as basic research. And there's a big debate in the country that's not always had out loud about whether we value basic research as opposed to applied research. I'm curious what your perspectives are on this and how important this is for our future and what we should be doing about it as a country.
You know, I think basic research lays the foundation for the really big changes that occur. It lays the foundation for discontinuous sorts of discoveries that change whole fields and whole disciplines. You know, I'm fond of recalling that when Larry Page began working on the work that eventually led to the Google search algorithm, he wasn't working on searching the net. He was working on a National Science Foundation project about how to search a digital library. And out of that, he got an amazing insight about how to search the World Wide Web. Now, some of us will remember, there were some okay search engines out there at that time. They were pretty good. But Google was a lot better in terms of an algorithm that gave you the answers you wanted. And that kind of innovation comes from an ability to work on really basic things without knowing a priori what the answer is and how you're going to solve the problem. And that's been the side that's been, as we've tried to deal with the budget issues in the United States, it's been the side that's been starved increasingly. And we are falling. I mean, I just saw data from 1979 to 2009. We have fallen from number 2 in the world as a percentage of GDP devoted to basic research to we're now number 10 in the world. That's a really dangerous position. I think, as Chuck Reed said earlier, the competition's out there, and it's going to get tougher, not easier. We're going to have to step it up if we want to continue to lead.
As we balance all of these different demands, you've talked about the arts and the sciences, basic research, applied research, the various challenges we face in the Valley. I'm curious how you're thinking about the balance at Stanford between technology, the STEM fields, and the arts and humanities. There are many people who think that Stanford could become a very high-level technical school. How do you think about this, and how do you think about maintaining the kind of institution that is best for the...
So we're committed to a liberal arts undergraduate experience, and that's required for all our students. So we're one of the few places in the country where if you come and get an engineering degree, you will have a foreign language requirement, and you'll have the same foreign language requirement that somebody doing a degree in some other part of the university will have. We think that's an important part of really being an educated citizen in this global environment in which we live. But we're also trying new things. We've got a boom. The computer science is now the most popular major in the university. I never thought we'd see that simply because it's also a very tough major. So the students are really driven to do this. So we've been thinking about creative ways to do things, and one of the things we've done is we now have a whole series of majors called CS plus X, where X is your favorite humanities discipline. So at Stanford, you can now major in computer science and music, or computer science and history, or computer science and English. And you don't do an English degree and a computer science degree. You do an integrated degree that you can complete in 4 years that has real depth in both disciplines. And I think this is an interesting way to reflect the fact that information technology is changing all our lives and all the fields we're in. And yet people still want to feed the other side of their brain and do the other thing they're interested in. So here's an interesting new way to do it. And I think the student response has been amazing. They really like the idea.
Yeah, we talked to a lot of your students as they're pursuing those degrees, and I can attest to that. There's a lot of value there. One of the other aspects of university education and colleges these days is sports. Today's signing day, for those of you who are not following, like I am. My phone is behind there with the Bleacher Report. And Stanford's doing quite well today, actually. I don't know if you know
yeah,
that.
we're doing pretty well, I think. Yeah.
Reed's brother just signed on with you all right before we came out here, the 49ers. So I'm curious how you're thinking about what's going on in college sports today. There's obviously a lot of controversy. How are you thinking about that?
I think we face a fork in the road. And that fork, one piece of it leads to non-student, semi-professional kind of status where football players and basketball players may get paid and where nobody really cares a lot if they graduate. The other fork says we have to re-emphasize the student athlete, the student portion of being a student athlete. We're heading down that path. That is for sure. That's the path we're heading down, and that's the path we're working towards. The other path is extremely dangerous. Young people think if they get to college and they play a sport and they play football or basketball, that they're going to have a professional career after them. There are 60 new players in the NBA every year. There are 5,000 basketball players in Division I and Division II that all think they're going to get one of those jobs. It doesn't happen. And if they walk away from their college experience without a degree, we have done them a disservice, and shame on us. So I think we have to re-emphasize that. We have to hold these people to high standards. We have to encourage graduation rates. You know, as proud as I am of how well the football team done this last year, the thing I'm most proud of is this is the third year in a row that they had a 100% graduation rate. That's what I'm most proud of.
So I've been watching the questions scroll on the screen in front of me, and I want to make sure some of them we've already addressed, but there's a lot of questions on K12 education, and people really enjoyed your remarks, and wanting to know what you think needs to happen to make some of those things that you're suggesting actually occur, such as access to pre-K, K12 performing at a high level. What do we need to do, and how can we make that happen?
Yeah, I think universal pre-K, obviously, it's going to require money. We're going to have to figure out how to do it. And I think as a society, maybe we have to think a little creatively. Maybe we have to think about universal pre-K with some kind of needs testing. So if your income is below the median income in the US, you would get it for free, and otherwise you'd be asked to contribute something to it. It's probably what we're going to have to do with all our entitlement programs over time, right? Medicare, we're probably going to eventually have to say, well, if you're wealthy, you get a reduced benefit, or your benefits are taxable, or something like that. Social Security, we'll probably have to do the same thing so we can deal with some of the gaps in inequities we have. I think working on that, I think trying to improve the teacher core, which will mean probably paying teachers more, but also holding them more accountable. Not in a simple way, not just with standardized tests, but really trying to do an in-depth evaluation of who can make a contribution. We need to lengthen the time before we decide that a teacher has a permanent position. The fact that we make this decision in California in 2 years is a fraud. We should be taking more time, but we need to support the teachers more at the same time. You know, the teacher graduates from college, and we assume they've got all the skills they need. They are just beginning on a journey of really learning how to be a great teacher. We've got to support them, give them mentoring, and give them the kind of systems they need to support. If we do that, we will be able to improve the quality of education that we have in this country.
You mentioned tenure in the K-12 setting, and obviously higher ed still has a tenure system in place, and particularly in a place like the Valley where things change so rapidly. Does this feel a little quaint or anachronistic to you?
Yeah, it probably does. I mean, I think, you know, it's not that it doesn't get broken at the top institutions, a place like Stanford or Berkeley, because there's so much peer pressure in the system, and we hold the bar to get tenure so high that people don't get over that bar unless they're really motivated by the recognition of their peers. So that tends to keep the system healthy. But I think if higher education could maintain academic freedom and get rid of tenure per se, offer people 10 or 20-year contracts and just have renewable 10-year contracts, something like that. That would make more sense. I don't know that it'll save a lot of money, but it might save some money, and it'll certainly deal with some issues where people are not really contributing.
Are there other changes you would make in the higher ed system writ large?
Yeah, so I would try to, I think one of the most important things we have to do is fix the issue around rising student debt. And the thing I'm most afraid of is students who pile up debt and don't graduate, because they're the highest risk for default. Those are the students who are going to default. A student who graduates, gets a good education, is going to have a good job. And I think we can deal with the debt issues for those students by income-based repayment plans, which I think are a great idea. That's really the direction to go. But what about the student who goes to an institution, and there are a lot of institutions that have very low graduation rates, particularly, not only, but particularly in the for-profit sector. They have low graduation rates, and those students default with a very high rate. Well, shouldn't the institution be responsible for some of that default? Because after all, they accepted that person. They didn't support them to get them to graduate. That's the kind of thinking we're going to need before. I mean, if we have a giant crisis around student debt and we crush the entire system and we crush the great work that's done with things like Pell Grants, it'll be a disaster for the country.
I want to make sure that before we leave, because I know I'm getting the signal that we're almost out of time, that we hear about your thoughts on, as you think about your legacy, how are you thinking about that? What would you like it to be? What would you want people to remember as your 15 years or 18 years or 20 years at Stanford?
Well, I think...
and maybe beyond, since you've done so many great things before that.
You know, I think we all, in the end, what I love most about my job is participating and helping make people successful. Young people, faculty members. I mean, this year we won our third Nobel Prize in a row in chemistry. It's a great, when you see a colleague do that and think that this university contributed to helping him achieve that's an incredible moment. When you see young people a young person win a Rhodes Scholarship, or you see, I met the other day a young alumnus who had graduated, whose father was a groundskeeper at the university. He came to Stanford, he graduated, went out, and now has a family that he's educating, and I can tell you, his kids are going to go to college. They're going to go to college because it changed his life, and it's going to change his kid's life. You know, I think that's, in some sense, the people we graduate are the biggest part of the legacy. Sure, the campus looks great. The arts are in a new place. We've built some wonderful interdisciplinary institutes. But in the end, it's really about the people and the people you send out there. And when you realize that a person like Justice Sandra O'Connor came to Stanford and got an education from rural Arizona, from a ranch somewhere, and had that education, and then she went out and did the great work she did. Those kinds of things really make the job worth it.
Anything else you want to leave our friends here with before we head off into our afternoon in glorious Silicon Valley?
Well, I'd say it is a glorious place. We live in the tech center of the world. We have made this the tech center of the world. It's the best place to live, not just because of the weather, although the weather helps. We all have to be committed to keeping it the kind of place that the next generation is going to want to come to and live in and commit their lives to and make a difference. And I thank you for all you do to help make that true.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
President Hennessy.